The United States war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, 16 years on. What progress is there? A new report suggests very little. Security is getting worse and the Taliban controls many parts of the country. So what is the White House strategy now? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the US has pumped more than $700 billion, that's $700 billion, into Afghanistan since the beginning of the war. But what has it got to show for it? The security situation seems to be getting worse by the day. 500 Afghan soldiers are dying every month, and the UN says civilian casualties are at a record high. The Taliban still controls large pockets of the country, and a new report by the US watchdog on Afghanistan says Washington doesn't even know how its money is being spent. Here's more from Jennifer Glass in Kabul.
The report puts security at the heart of many of Afghanistan's problems. The UN says between March and May, security incidents increased 21% over the previous quarter. The problem of ghost or non-existent soldiers who collect pay remains an issue, although the report says improvements have been made to ensure accountability in that and other areas.
We are fighting corruption. We have imprisoned people, from army foot soldiers up to people as high-ranking as generals, and whoever is involved in corruption will be sent to court. The international community has helped us tackle corruption.
But the US is still having problems telling how successful reforms are. Almost $500 million was spent to improve intelligence units without any provable metrics to see if the measures were effective.
The report says Afghan security forces control only about 60% of the country and are taking punishing casualties in the fight against the Taliban and other anti-government groups. The Afghan government is putting together a 4-year roadmap to make the forces more effective.
This new brigade is part of that plan, incorporating special forces police, soldiers, and intelligence units to work better and stronger on the battlefield. Much of the Taliban's funding comes from opium poppies and the drug trade. The value of opiates doubled in 2016 to just over $3 billion, up from $1.5 billion the year before. The Afghan government didn't fare as well, with domestic revenues in the first half of the year declining 25% over the previous year. The government can only pay for about 40% of its spending. That leaves it dependent on its largest donor, the United States. The Inspector General is concerned U.S. officials can't adequately monitor how billions in American money is spent because deteriorating security means they don't leave the U.S. Embassy compound. He says such risk aversion could send the wrong message to Afghans that terrorists may be winning. U.S. officials in the Afghan capital wouldn't comment on the report. Jennifer Glass, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Okay, let's introduce our guests now. On Skype from Lenox, Massachusetts, is David Sedney, former Deputy US Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Washington, D.C., we have Omar Samad, who's the former senior advisor to the Chief Executive of Afghanistan, Abdullah, as well as the former Afghan ambassador to Canada and France. Welcome to you both. I'm just wondering whether you, Omar, can give us your assessment of your country at this particular point in time as we await to hear from the United States administration as to what the next phase of policy will be.
Well, Afghanistan, I think, is in a somewhat precarious situation right now as it stands in a crossroads of sorts, as it has had done in the past as well, whenever big decisions have to be made about strategy and policy as to define the way forward in Afghanistan. Right now, everybody is awaiting a decision from Washington, which will then help NATO come up with its own decision, and the Afghan people are also looking at the Afghan government and seeing how it's doing and what kind of a partner it will be and can be to the international community in the fight against the Taliban, terrorism as a whole, and in terms of governance, which I think is also playing a role. So it's a sort of wait and see, but a very dangerous, risky wait and see, and I think and I hope that there will be a decision soon, which will help move the Afghan case forward.
And Omar, staying with you because of where you are, particularly, how is this report, a quarterly report, but the latest report to come from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, SIGA, how is this report playing into the deliberations that are taking place there? It accuses Afghan security forces of child sexual abuse. It talks more and more about the corruption, and it basically says that there's a stalemate in Afghanistan. How is that feeding into what we imagine to be a certain amount of, should we say, confusion in the US administration at the moment?
You know, all of those elements that are part of this report are to some extent true. But they have existed for years. It's nothing new. I think that what we have seen over the years is some improvement on all three fronts, at least the ones that you mentioned. Whether it's corruption or issues that have to do with child abuse and so on and so forth. There is some improvement compared to the past. I would take that as a positive note, but the country faces a lot of problems. The problems are not just local in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's issues at the source breed from the region. You know, we are a victim, Afghanistan has been a victim for many years of neighbors who have their own ulterior motives and agendas and are using proxies and militants of all sorts, domestic and international, to wage a war against stability in Afghanistan. And they see that to their interest, strategic interest. And so Afghanistan has become sort of a battleground for regional rivalries.
Indeed. All right. Now, David, you've already completed a year of living in Kabul. I just wanted to get your impression of life in the Afghan capital right now for ordinary people as far as possible. You are at the American University.
Yes, I was the acting president at the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul, living outside the green zone, living and working with thousands of students and staff. And what I found was a people who are full of hope and resiliency, despite the dangers, despite the threats. These are young people, particularly our university students, who have a hope and belief in their future that many people would not understand. But they do. They have a confidence that they are going to overcome all these obstacles. These are students who get up every day and have to make a life or death decision on whether to come to the university. The university was attacked. The Taliban killed 15 of our people, but our students came back, and they came back stronger and in greater numbers than ever before. So I'll just paraphrase what one of our students said to me. She said, in the end, our books and our pens are mightier than the Taliban's sword. We are committed to the future. That's the kind of spirit I found in Afghanistan. So despite everything you read in the press, despite all the reports of attacks, there are millions of people in Afghanistan who are dedicated to a better country, and I will put my bet on them.
But obviously we're speaking at a time when the UN has already outlined the fact that there are record numbers of civilian casualties occurring in Afghanistan. Everybody is awaiting some sort of pronouncement to come from Washington, D.C. You've worked in the machinery of Washington, D.C. What do you think is going on? Why the delay for the announcement as to the new stage of policy with regard to Afghanistan?
Well, I've been involved in these kind of decisions for many years, and there's a basic tug of war in the United States between those people who want to work to solve problems outside the United States and those who want to pull the doors closed and be isolationist. That was there during the Bush administration, during the Obama administration, and the whole kind of debate is being repeated in the Trump administration. This is a fundamental divide in U.S. Views towards the rest of the world, towards of U.S. foreign policy, and the Trump administration is going to have to make up its mind. Both the Bush and Obama administrations were ambivalent. They made some commitments to Afghanistan, but they also pulled back. They set deadlines. They set exit dates. For Afghanistan, however, as for most problems in the world, what is needed is a sustained long-term commitment. That is where the Trump administration has the ability to set itself apart from the other previous administrations and really make a long-term commitment to Afghanistan. And if they do that, then I think that there will be a gradual improvement in Afghanistan over the coming years.
Okay, Omar, again, you're in Washington, D.C. What are your ears telling you? Do you think that the Trump administration, that we imagine to be fairly isolationist when it comes to foreign policy, do you think that Afghanistan is going to get that kind of pronouncement, the kind of robust engagement that David has outlined is what is necessary?
Well, that's the hope of many Afghans. We are still waiting to see which direction this will take. There are so many different ideas that are being floated around over the last few weeks, that some of which don't make any sense, and others that may be dangerous. And what I agree with David is that we need consistency, we need coherence, and we need commitment that delivers and has an outcome that is a win-win situation for the Afghan people, the U.S., NATO, and everybody else, every other country that has helped Afghanistan over the last 15, 16 years. Many people have shed blood. A lot of treasure has been spent in Afghanistan, and people want to see results. And I think that it is going to be important to set benchmarks and to define what the outcome should be. The outcome should not be ambivalent, as was said. The outcome should be very clear, it should be positive, and it should be one that says we are going to win this. Now, there are different ways of approaching it. Some have worked in the past, some have not. Some have given some result, but we have exhausted a lot of options in the past, whether this should be finally solved one way or the other, how much military versus politics and diplomacy, what to do with the neighbors, a lot of questions, a very complex set of issues, and the world has changed. And the other thing that is new is that we are now, right now, at a time when there are new players interested in Afghanistan for other reasons. And it is not the time of Obama, it is not the time of Mr. Bush.
Okay, Omar,
it is a new period
be
with
specific.
new games.
Be specific then. Who are these new players and what are their interests in Afghanistan?
These players have always existed, except that now Afghanistan is of a different priority to them. Example, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, even for some reasons the Turks, the Indians. Obviously, Pakistan has always had a stake in Afghanistan and has considered Afghanistan as part of its strategy, whether it's versus India or as part of its strategy versus other issues in the region. But now we are in a more complex situation, and the Afghan government is as well a major player and should be a major player, seems to be grappling with a host of issues, domestic, political issues, social issues, economic issues especially. Yes, the Afghan people, have hope for the future and their spirit is very high and strong. But if we compare that to 10 years ago or 15 years ago or even 5 years ago, things have changed and we need to make sure that it does not unravel.
Okay. David, let me put to you, and I know this is quite controversial because this is a theory that's coming primarily at the moment from Eric Prince, the founder of the Blackwater private security firm, of course, which achieved notoriety with its activities in Iraq, and a former Navy SEAL. But he points out currently that part of the problem of any US policy towards Afghanistan is its remoteness. He is instead advocating for a much more direct presence on the ground. He calls it a viceroy, if you like, and says that the United States needs to act almost as the East India Company did of old, where it was on the ground, it ran private security units there, controlled them, commanded them from there, and was able to assess the successes and failures directly on the ground. Do you think that that's going to fly in Washington today?
I don't think it would fly anywhere. In many ways, we had that situation during the early days when the U.S. was in Afghanistan in 2003 and 4. When we had a very strong presence, a very strong ambassador, and a lot of private security companies on the ground. That approach really failed. The only way for Afghanistan to succeed domestically is for Afghans to choose the right path for themselves. The problem is, as Omar Samad said, is there are other actors who need to be controlled, and primarily among them Pakistan. That is not a problem that Mr. Prince's solution can address. The difficulty with U.S. policy so far, it has been ambivalent, as I said before, but it has also not squarely confronted the issue of Pakistan. I agree with Omar, there are other actors, but there's only one determinative actor in Afghanistan from the outside, and that is Pakistan. And until Pakistan changes its policies, this war will continue.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to introduce Haroun Mir, who is co-founder of Afghanistan's Centre for Research and Policy Studies. He's joining us live from the Afghan capital, Kabul. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Can I ask you, because we're at the stage whereby we're running over a few possible ideas as to what should come out of the United States with regard to the next stage of policy towards Afghanistan. I'm just wondering whether you think that there has been a slight mismatch, if you like, in terms of emphasis on nation building rather than establishing security.
Well, if you look back at the recent history of Afghanistan, and this is a combination of security challenges, political challenges, and economic challenges. So we have been able to address political challenge in Afghanistan, and we were able to find a formula where all Afghan political groups, ethnic groups, and they found a common ground for political power sharing in the context of the Afghan government, in particular in the context of democracy. But the security challenge, unfortunately, has remained despite the presence of NATO and US military in Afghanistan. For example, other guests talked about Pakistan, but Pakistan was not honest with Afghanistan, in particular with the United States, because the insurgents were able to have their safe havens in Pakistan, supplies and financial support coming not only from Pakistan, but mainly from the Gulf countries, and some of the charity organizations were tremendously supporting the Taliban. And now there are new actors, as Omar Samad mentioned. We have a resurgence, Russia, China is also becoming more engaged in Afghanistan, and Iran certainly also trying to counter the U.S. influence.
All right, Haroun,
I think
you're outlining
the only place where they could force,
No, I mean, you're outlining what is a shifting geopolitical landscape, aren't you? Let me go back to Omar and ask then whether you think that an additional 4,000 troops, because I guess that's the sort of range we're talking about, of US or NATO troops, but an additional 4,000 or so, do you think this is going to make any difference whatsoever?
It all depends on the package overall. Let's remember that these are not troops. These will be a few thousand trainers, officers, mentors, people with high capabilities. And they are supposed to, if the plan works out this way, they're supposed to be at the forefront with Afghan forces, basically not just staying in their bases. That should make a difference, but the package should also include better equipment, better intelligence gathering, better coordination with all different elements of the Afghan and international security apparatus in Afghanistan, as well as a better use of air power in Afghanistan. I think that as a package and as part of a new, vibrant strategy, it should make and ought to make a difference on the ground, and then that should help us with other issues, whether it's diplomatic or political.
And David, would you agree then that the overwhelming emphasis of policy needs to continue with this assisting and training and boosting, if you like, of Afghan local forces? Is that where the most energy needs to be directed, and indeed most dollars?
That is where the tactical focus needs to be. General John McNicholson, the commander of the U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan, has put together, I think, a really excellent package, and it will provide the ability for the Afghan forces to turn the tide against the Taliban. But, and this is a big but, the real question here, again, is the long-term sustained commitment. Right now, Pakistan and the Taliban are betting very heavily that the U.S. and international forces will leave. As long as they think they will leave, they will continue to fight. If a sustained long-term commitment is made, That will force Pakistan and the Taliban to change their strategic calculus, move things towards a peace process. But without that really sustained commitment, the war will continue. If there's a sustained commitment, then I think there's a path forward, and the package that General Nicholson has proposed, I think, is an excellent one.
And Haroun, would you agree with that then, that basically what needs to be forthcoming is a far greater, more extensive commitment to bolstering Afghanistan, and as well as the additional troops, which we suspect might be coming when eventually the announcement is made?
Well, indeed, the mini surge will not change the tide of the war. So we are in a deep stalemate in Afghanistan, and I think that will certainly boost the morale of the Afghan forces, the morale of the Afghan government, but most importantly, it will prevent the Taliban to expand and to break the stalemate in their favor. And they are expanding their ground and territory right now. So that will be certainly a welcome news for Afghanistan if we will have this mini surge. But in the long term, certainly we have to look for a peace solution because we will not be able to defeat the Taliban militarily. But so we have important gains in Afghanistan. These are fundamental gains. If you look at the achievements of the past 16 years, these are tremendous. For someone like myself who have always lived in Afghanistan, if we compare Afghanistan of today with 1990s, we have tremendous achievements. So these achievements, we have to work on it so in order to make them irreversible and sustainable. That is very important. And right now we don't talk about that much about achievements in the past 16 years, but because of the political crisis in Afghanistan,
right.
economic crisis, and most importantly, the dire security situation. But these achievements are important, particularly for the new generation. We have an emerging generation who are committed to the values that we have achieved in Afghanistan, and this is very important. This is why we need the support of the NATO countries and most importantly the United States, because despite all these challenges, we are one of the countries in the region where we have a democratic system, we have free media, we have free speech, and that is an important
Haroun,
achievement in the past 16 years.
Sorry, can I just jump in there, because we are running out of time, and I'd like to go to Omar and just ask you whether you think that the hiatus, if you like, in Washington policymaking right now is actually emboldening the fighting groups on the ground, because it's not just the Taliban, is it, in Afghanistan now?
It is. I firmly believe that it is emboldening anyone who wants to pose a challenge, whether it's the Taliban or anybody else inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan, a challenge to Afghan stability and have other agendas on their hand. So I hope that Washington is going to take notice and come up with something that is coherent, sustainable, and with a clear outcome.
Thank you all very much indeed. Haroun Mir, David Sedney and Omar Samad, thank you. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, there's our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. But for now, it's goodbye.